Hey guys, this is DFD, aka Dark Frozen Depths, back with another Kamihime project video. Now, this one, it's kind of come to my attention that some people may or may not know how some of this stuff works, so I've decided to do this video. And this is thanks to recent comments I had with somebody about talking about pride, vigor, and a few other things, because that was on my video where I did a solo of the Fire Guardian with my light team. And I kind of explain why I used some of the stuff I used in that video. But this is something that a lot of people really should try to get at least some general idea of it, because of the fact that this is very important to gameplay if you're trying to at least get better at the game. I can't necessarily say get good at it, because it still depends on what you get, because this game is still a gacha game, it's still RNG, but it's still the fact that everybody, no matter what point you are, is always going to be using these mechanics, so I need to start breaking them a little bit further. But first and foremost is basically a display about your combat power, which is essentially it's a general measurement of your base stats, but it doesn't necessarily give how strong you really are. But those that typically have a lot of high base stats, it's usually assumed that they also know at that point in the game where, okay, say you're like rank 120 and you have a combat power of 75,000. Generally at that point you're considered to be a player that does indeed know what they're doing. So there's that, but all it really is just showing your base stats. Now for those that are curious, it is, at simple terms, the sum of your entire team's attack and HP, but it's also divided by 7. So that said, say everybody has generally between 10,000 base HP and 11,000 base HP, then it's going to add up all 7 of those and divide that by 7, even if there's nobody in the slot. So keep that in mind. And then it's also going to do the same thing with the attack power, basically. It's going to add those both together, and that's your total, if that makes sense. So on some of my teams, I'm generally between 50 to 60,000 because I'm still trying to build up other elements. But the strongest of my light teams are generally around 80,000. So that's something to know for a general comparison. So it's like the average base stats of other teams, because they don't have access to as many gacha weapons as my light team typically. That's where there's a big difference in that jump of power. Plus, I've also done different things where if you're trying to really increase your base stats, there's 2 things you need to really consider. One is getting plus 99 on all your weapons and Addons, because that's going to up the base stats. You can do the same for your Kamihime, but it only goes to them instead of everybody else. Now, the plus values, they give 1 HP and 3 attack per plus value. And since you can do this for up to 10 weapons and up to 6 Addons, that is about almost 1,600 more base HP, on top of 3 times that amount in attack, which will add up further when you go into weapon skills and whatnot. Now, another thing that everybody should consider doing is definitely getting the phantom weapons, because getting a phantom weapon set up, you need 6 weapons of the same type. And that is going to give you, it generally gives you the phantom weapon skill, but what most people don't realize too is the fact that if you don't mind sacrificing doing it early, you would still get the second effect, which is to increase the base attack and base HP of all weapons of the same type. That does not matter how many you have. And it is a 1.45 times multiplier, as in 45% more base HP for all of the weapons of that same type, including the phantom weapon itself. And for attack power, it will be a 30% increase, or a 1.3 times multiplier. So say that you have a weapon that gives 2,000 attack. With that phantom weapon, the weapon that had 2,000 attack will now have 2,600. And if it had 100 HP, it's now got 145. So that's something to consider, and it goes to everyone. Now, going a little bit further into things, there's two other interesting little things you can do, but you need to know game mechanics even further, and it is generally not recommended to do that for one of these things. You can do it for the second one. Now, the first one is matching favorite weapon types. If a character, like I know for a fact Soul is a light character that a lot of people tend to get, or at least try to get, because she's like one of the better light healers right now. Now, she likes stabs, and that's despite the fact that she comes from a gun, but she likes stabs. If you have a staff on the weapon grid, she will get a bonus 20% base stats from that staff. Everybody else will get the normal amount, unless they like staves too. Now, this is generally something that we won't do too much on, but when the lucent weapons kick in, it gets a little bit more important. Because if you're really trying to maximize your teams, but you do have the rare case of having a lucent weapon to work towards, then that's where you might want to consider matching weapon types. Lucent weapons are very hard to use later on. However, if you can use them, they can be very powerful. It's just the fact that there's a very good chance you're compromising something else, which is why they were, for the most part, not used. But that bonus stat increase still comes into play for favorite weapon types, and that also applies to your soul. So a soul that a lot of people like getting is Yorimitsu, because when you crunch the numbers and all that and shell out as many bursts as possible, she does end up being one of the best damage dealing souls, even after they change the skill effects of other ones later on. But her general thing is the fact that she likes bows and spears, or lances if you want to call them that. So anytime any of those is on the weapon grid, then she's getting another 20% more base stats from that specific weapon. So that's yet another multiplier. Now, some of you might be wondering, what about Addons? They do the same thing, only it's towards elements. And this is where it's a little bit more easy to pull it off. Now, if you match an element, like say you have a wind Kamihime like Frigg or Gaia, any wind Addons will get a, if I remember correctly, 20% base stat increase as well towards them. So if that Addons gave, say, like the Kaiser's, a max level Kaiser, 3,300 attack power, then the Wind Kaiser would give Gaia and Frigg basically 20% more of that for base stats. Now, going a little bit further, there are Addons in the game, and they're very powerful too, where if you set them as a main effect, you have to element match the subslots to them. This is another reason why it's very important to try and get 6 Addons of the same element, with one very strong one for the lead. And there's even been events where you get those type of Addons too. They're just not as strong as the gacha ones. But the event Addons and the gacha Addons that give the strongest elemental attack increases, they all use that mechanic. The event Addons will only give you up to 50%, but the elemental ones, they'll be 140%, unless it's light or dark, which is 100%. And it will increase as you get more break limits for the gacha ones. The event ones, I just said 50% because generally you can get maximum event Addons. There's no point in really needing to know what they give outside of maximum break. It's the gacha ones where you may need to know about what what you get for the break limits, because you may or may not get all 5 copies of them. So there's that. But generally speaking, you want to match all the elements to your team. So weapons, Addons, match it all. The only exceptions is the phantom weapons and maybe a lucid weapon if you're able to use it later on, but that's something you really need to heavily consider, because it will, if you do it wrong, you will really mess up your team. But anyways, going further, and this is where it gets very math heavy, so you have been warned, the damage formula. Now, I will go with the easiest part of the damage formula first, and that is enemy defenses. Long story short, your base attack power will get multiplied by all these different things, which is like assault, elemental, all that other type of stuff. And that is all valued against the enemy's defense. Most enemies in the game have 10 defense, but there are a good number of them right here that are mentioned to have different ones. Some have 5, some have 8, some have 12, some have 20, some even have 30. There's a very special enemy that has 10,000, and that's in the accessory quest, the 6th accessory quest for Thunder. But that's a special case because you're not really meant to deal damage to it. You're meant to just bypass its defenses with defense ignore. But all the damage you deal is based upon different defense values. And when you debuff an enemy's defense, or when they buff their own, this is what changes. So that's something to know. That is something very simple to know about. Elemental and literal defense debuffs will affect this. So if they have a drop of 30% wind resistance and they also have 20% defense down, then they hit the maximum cap of 50%. But if they have a 20% defense buff, then you need to put another 20% defense down to counter it, or just remove the defense down, or remove the defense buff. So what that means is, say you have 70% defense down on an enemy because you got, like, say 20% from attack, 20% from A frame, 20% from B frame, and then you got 30% from elemental. If they buff themselves with 20% defense, it will not change how much damage you deal. But if they buff even more than that, then it will, because it will be valued against each other. Now, attack will do the same thing as well, but that's in the very last part of when you're dealing damage. So if you are debuffed in attack, that's going to be its own multiplier at the end, which it's just going to lower the damage you take. So simply put, just get rid of that. Just get rid of that debuff. Now, here's where things get a little bit more interesting. Going down the list, the first one is basically the assault frame. And when it says character attack on those Addons, that's assault. When it says pride on a weapon, that also counts as assault. But pride works in a way where it gives you a flat increase, and then it also gives you more as your HP drops. Assault is one of the most common things to come across, and it's generally considered to get at least every weapon that isn't your soul weapon. Like, it's generally considered to get every single weapon that isn't the main weapon for the soul, get attack on all of it. Or in some cases, like, say like you're like me and you don't have certain soul weapons for the S-class souls like Yori or Caspar. Even then, try to get an attack weapon for them if you can help it. Because if they don't have their soul weapon, then it's not going to really do anything. Because you can put like, say you have Shingen's soul weapon. If you put it on Yori, it's not going to give the bonus effects, really. The only thing you'll get is whenever they burst, you'll get that, whatever the burst does. Now, that said, it is generally considered to have at least 150% in assault, which is easily done. Because if you get skill level 20 large assault on all of your weapons, you will easily get close to, if not past, that 150%. And you can final break in order to skill level 30. So that said, just getting 10 skill level 30 weapons that have assault on them, large assault, that's 210% in assault. Now, while that would give you a good start in damage, it's not necessarily the best way to shell out damage. That's because there is something called attribute value in another multiplier. This is your elemental attack. The only way to get elemental attack from weapons is the soul weapons. And it is 30% for the A class weapons, 40% for the S class. Because they will have a choice of either the elemental attack weapon or the HP weapon. This doesn't mean go for the elemental one out the gate, because sometimes the HP ones have better effects. Because it's not just the stat increase, they'll also give you a better effect. Like say Rom and Asclepius, I think her name is, they tend to be better with the HP ones, but you could still use either one for them. But the general thing is you can only get elemental attack on your weapons from the soul weapons. So that said, where do you get the rest of the elemental attack? What I didn't mention about the assault thing is the fact that buffs also count as well. So if you get an assault buff, it will add to that total. And it counts as attack buffs, basically. Elemental buffs will add to that total as well. So if you get an elemental buff, it will add to its elemental total. So you have 100% elemental attack and you get a buff of 20%, now you got 120%. That's simple stuff. The Addons is the main resource for elemental attack, and that's something you really, really want. Now, granted, there may be cases where it might be better to take the other Addons, like the ones that boost assault or something like that. But those are very rare cases. Almost all the time you will want the elemental attack add-ons. Almost all the time. For instance, I'm in a rare case with my light team where using Haggith as a main add-on would actually be better than using Monog Armor. However, not everybody's in that situation. Almost all the cases you will want to have elemental attack for your add-on. Now, going further into the formula, the next one up is called Vigorous, or as it's translated on this website, sometimes Strong. Vigorous is a very special case because of the fact that the two main kicks for it is that it will drop as your HP does, and it will be completely gone if your HP is at half. But since it's in another multiplier, it's generally valued quite highly. But anybody that plans on using Vigor, you want to keep your HP as high as possible. Like, as high as possible. And just increasing your max HP does not increase your Vigor effect. It just slows the drain. Like, for instance, if you have 50% Vigor, it won't matter if you have 5,000 or 10,000 HP. You need to have it full in order to get full Vigor effect. It just makes it easier to maintain the more health you have. Now, the other thing that's special about Vigor, it caps at 100%. It is the total upper limit. However, you can overcap this so that it still gives 100% even if your HP is not full. The more you overcap it, the lower you can be on your current HP and still get the 100% effect. This is something that some people are considering, myself included. It depends on how much access you have to Vigor, because there are some Vigor weapons that you can actually grind out, but it may or may not be better to do that. Generally speaking, if you can get a weapon that gives Assault and Vigor, like the full Guardian guns for Thunder, that's definitely a weapon to go get. Because you're getting two different multipliers on one weapon. And maybe you might be able to work things around by getting a lot of assault weapons and maybe getting a few Vigor ones to get an effect too, which is something I would consider doing for a light free-to-play later on. But generally speaking, you want to get Assault and Vigor together. That's something to know. Now, going into special attack. As the name implies, this is very special to try and get because it is one of the hardest things to try and get access to. As of right now, there is only a few Addons that will give you special attack, which are the event ones where you need to lose HP for special attack to start kicking in, and SSR Diablos, who just gives you a lot of special attack, but you have to split up the elements on your main team, which is generally not recommended, but you can work around that a little bit. Now, I wouldn't go out of your way to get this. Excuse me. I wouldn't go out of your way to get this, because the thing with this is that while it isn't another multiplier, it is so conditional to try and get. However, I have said in a few other videos that the best starting Addon would happen to be SSR Diablos, because of the fact that she works regardless of element, and this is the reason why. Special attack could be a replacement for elemental attack, or even compound on it. If you get an elemental attack Addon with 100%, or if you get a guardian Addon, then SSR Diablos would not be something you would want to use. But until then, she would actually be one of the better ones to try and start off with if you're re-rolling, because of this effect. Because you can sip and have her on like elements that aren't your main one, and then get a friend that has like a very strong elemental one and have like 2 very strong multipliers. But in the case of this, it is in a different multiplier, and if you're really going to try and use SSR Diablos, try to have 3 characters that are the same element, and then just get 2 different elements for the other 2. And make them either buffers or debuffers. Just make the 3 that are the same element, make them the damage dealers. Now, going into this next one. This next one is only accessible by one thing and one thing alone. They say White Tiger on here, but her name is really Bayako. She gives a damage increase buff in this multiplier. She's the only thing that does that. And it is still based on the limit breaks she has. And then on top of that, the big gimmick with her and the rest of the Divine Beasts, you can only use them once per copy, no matter the limit breaks. So say you have 2 copies of her, and both are, say, max limit break, then she's giving 100% damage up for that one summon, and then you have to summon her again and get it back. After that, you can't summon her anymore for the rest of the fight. So that's something to know. It's why she's highly valued, because she gives that huge buff, even though you can only use her once per run. And I say per run because if a stage has multiple parts to it, like you face one wave of enemies and then face another one, you still can't summon her back. You only get 1 time per fight. But because of what she does, it makes it very easy to cap or even overcap damage. Because you can overcap damage in this game. It is a soft cap, not a hard cap. So there you go. Now, this next one is called Sneak Attack, which is also known as Stinger or Critical. This is a very interesting case because it is its own multiplier, but there are 2 downsides to it that make it generally not considered. Now, the first downside is that it will never ever work if you do not have elemental advantage. You must have elemental advantage or this will never go off. Second is the fact that it has a chance of going off for each thing that gives sneak attack. So if you have a guaranteed sneak attack, you're going to see it go off. If you have, say, 2 40%, then you have a 40% chance of both going off, but generally an 80% chance of one of them going off. And if both go off, they're both applied into this multiplier. So that's how it basically works. Now, that said, in some rare cases, I would consider getting an assault and a sneak attack weapon. But they are very, very situational, and it only is if you're never ever planning on using that team off element. Like for instance, I raised a dark team, and there was a point where I considered using a stinger weapon for them, but only because it is a gotcha weapon that has a few other very good effects like Assault and Defender. Some of you may know that weapon too. It is a hammer that you get Nephthys from. Now, if I do find a better dark weapon, I'm most likely dropping that, but that is the one case I would consider it because I don't ever use dark unless I'm facing a light enemy. So that's something to know about that. But generally speaking, you want your sneak attack, if anything, from buffs. That way you do not compromise your weapon grid. And then Souls also had this little energy release thing where they can do it. I would generally consider getting it every single time for your offensive based Souls because of the fact that it's just random free crit rate. And the interesting thing that some people may or may not have noticed, if you do damage and it says sting instead of weak point, then that means the stinger went off. You'll generally see higher damage numbers too. Now then, this is where things get a little bit weird. The Union Guardians, there is 4 elements. So sadly we don't have a light or dark one. While they give a very small amount, I think it's up to 6%, that's still another multiplier. So generally you should get roughly like 6% damage increase if you max that level that thing, which most unions have at this point. But it's slight, but it's there. So this is why it's considered to basically try to switch your guardian based on whatever event is going on. But the thing is, it's a small buff, so you're not losing out too much if you can't use it. It's just there. But it's still free extra damage, so you can't really complain about that one. All you just need to do is have the Union Guardian match the element you're using. Now, this next one, it doesn't exactly say the rest of them, but it works the same general way. Now, this next multiplier, it's not just technical. Now, technical is the first one I'm going to talk about because it deals with normal attacks. And then we have the upper damage limit on screen right here. Well, the upper limit increase for it on screen. Technical is essentially increasing your normal attack damage, and it also can give you a cap increase. Because some buffs will definitely give you a cap increase, and technical weapons will do the same thing. That cap increase is 300%. The effect that it gives can go past that 300%. I just don't know exact values because they never measured that out. Now, that said, this applies only to normal attacks. And right now, for us, normal attacks will have a soft cap of 350,000. If you go past that soft cap, all excess damage is reduced by 90%. Which means, if you would normally do 400,000 in a normal attack, but you don't have any cap increases, then the 50,000 that's past that cap point would turn into 5,000. Because you literally deal like 1/10 of the excess. Now, that said, there's also the same case with ability damage and burst. Ability damage would happen to be elaborate. That has a cap increase limit of 100% right now, but it will change to 150% later on. And it's self-explanatory. You get an increased amount of ability damage, and then if it does have the cap buff or something like that, then you get a higher soft cap on all your ability damage. The one that a lot of people will worry about the most, and I say a lot because normal attacks do come up pretty well later, but it may or may not be optimal. But the one that I would say generally everybody should worry about is definitely Exceed, because of the fact that it is going to increase your burst damage, and that also has a cap increase of 100% maximum, which never changes even later on. So that said, bursts have a normal soft cap of 1 million. Some characters can also sip and go a little bit further than that. Like, I know there's one character where if she has special conditions, she can do 3 million. Most other ones can do 2 million or so. That's the thing like that. With the cap increase, it will up it even further. Now, that said, if you get the maximum cap increase for Exceed, it will push it to 2 million soft cap. And generally later on, that combined with some special Kamihime, those special Kamihime will be able to deal like 4 million bursts, roughly. That is a lot of damage to be dealing in one attack. And bursts are generally considered the thing to aim for the most because of the fact that it is a crap ton of damage, and you get bonus damage based on how many bursts you've already done. So full burst is definitely the way to go, especially if you can pull them off very, very frequently. The slowest amount of time it will take for full burst will be 11 turns, but there are setups for every element where you can push it to where it's absurd points where you can do full burst every other turn. And then in some cases, you'll even get some in-between ones. This can be pushed even further with who is arguably the best Divine Beast, North Star-Lord, who happens to be the Dark Divine Beast. She will give you burst gauge regardless of her break limits. However, if you happen to get her to max break limit, it is instant 100 burst gauge to the entire team. And like Bayako, you can only use her once per copy. So once you use her, then you can't use that copy for the rest of the entire fight, like entire stage or whatever. Now, it will siphon off some of your HP to do that, but that's where you can really abuse Exceed, because you're getting, like, say, full burst and then go back towards it. So honestly, anybody that has her, I would consider her priority for the guild competition things, because even as a free player, you can still get the break limit items for these Addons and whatnot. But bursts are generally considered to be the most damaging thing in the game. The only exception would be normal attacks if you can push them to some very, very absurd limits, and then on top of that still get combo increases to do a lot of them at once. Other than that, you are probably going to be focusing on bursts, so Exceed is definitely a very high priority. I would not worry about getting technical or elaborate until later on, when the soft cap changes happen, and even then you might still not want them. So it depends on what you have access to. But other buff correction is really technical, Exceed, or elaborate. Only one of them will work at a time, because you can have all three, but they only apply to specific damage. And then that last multiplier is what I said before earlier, which was the attack debuff. Simply put, if you have like 50% attack down, that's what's going to go right there. Simply put, you're going to want to remove that. Now, this is generally the damage formula. Like, the actual damage formula is on screen, and it is a cluster of math. But if you want to keep things simple, just give a rough estimate of, say, like, I have 150% attack, like 150% assault on my grid, then I have like 100% elemental, then I have 50% vigor. Just turn those into actual decimals and multiply them by each other. Like, I even gave the question earlier to that one person, would you rather get 100% more assault, or would you rather get 50% more vigor? And this is assuming you already have 100% assault and 100% elemental. So just off a quick math on that one, it would generally be a jump from 100% to 200% assault, which makes that a 3.0 times multiplier when you convert it to decimals. The elemental would be a 2 times multiplier, so that's like times 6. And then it will be, if you're going up against the other one, which would be vigor, then it would be a 2x multiplier from assault, because it's still at 100, a 2x multiplier from defender, and then a 50% multiplier from vigor. which would still be times 6. But instead, you spent enough weapons to get 50% vigor, which could free up some slots, compared to trying to get 100% assault, which would take at least 5 weapons. Or you would have to really play risky and get your HP to drop. That's something you have to consider when you're building your grids. It will take some math if you're trying to get the most out of your stuff, but it is needed. That said, weigh your options and see what works best. That's why I even pointed out the fact of SSR Dia, because of the fact that that's something people tend to overlook, is that it still depends on how much damage you can deal with everybody else. Numbers will never ever lie on that one. There have been cases where I've used SSR Dia to do more damage than just full on team of one element. And that's because of the fact that I knew how the numbers would line up. Now I can't really do that now unless it's on my win team, because all my elements have a 100% Addon or better. But the win team does not. They're still running with a 40% elemental Addon from an event. That's the one time I can use SSR Diablos, because I know she'll be better than that. Now, in some cases you may not want to do it either, because if it's a mission or something where you have to use a specific element or a specific rarity, that's where you have to be careful, because you'll still get screwed out of that mission if you do it wrong. But generally speaking, you want to add up all the different stuff on this. This is something that everybody should be doing, because quite frankly, it could be the difference between, say, getting a team that has like 50,000 combat power but doing only like 100,000 damage per hit, compared to a team with 35,000 combat power but they're dealing double the damage of the 50,000. That's something to really consider. Now, something else that should be noted too is multipliers on different things as well. Each ability in each burst has its own multiplier, and I'm pulling up the burst multipliers right here based on the rarity of stuff. Now, when it comes to burst multipliers, it is based on the rarity of who or what you use. In this case, you're seeing weapons right there, and that's on the left side of this. Now, weapons would happen to be like, you generally would want to use SSR weapons anyway, so I wouldn't worry about it too much. But starting off, you may or may not have them, so that will influence the different burst damage you'll deal with your souls. You can actually put a final break limit weapon on them and max it out, and they will deal like a 5.5 multiplier generally. Now, in the case of the Kamihime, it is based on a rarity. It is a 1.5 multiplier for our Kamihime, and it starts off like that. SR Kamihime have a 3.0 multiplier and they can increase it. SSR have a 4.5 multiplier and they can increase it. If they happen to be awakened, they will go up to the 5.5. Now, that is what is going to get added to whatever exceed or whatever you have. That's something that is always there. And I do know that exceed will cap out at 1,000% for the multiplier, while the cap itself will be like 100 increase. So that's something to know. But if you can hit the cap, you won't even need to worry about the multiplier too much. Because if you can get the multipliers for somewhere else, you just need to worry about the 100% cap. It's the same case with ability damage, but abilities have their own little multipliers. Like, most of them will generally have anywhere between a 1 to 4 multiplier. Some go higher. there's a few Kamihime that can even get like a 7 or an 8. And then there's Medea who can get like a 10 times multiplier. And then there's a rare cases like Hercules and I think her name was Parashurama. It's hard to pronounce her name. But they have an ability where based on the number of buffs they'll set up and deal a bigger multiplier on their damage, which honestly can hit more damage in a single hit than Medea, but Medea still does more damage overall. But abilities you have to look up and find out what their soft caps and what their multipliers are. So that's the unfortunate thing about that. I don't know if Elaborate will have a cap on the damage increase, but it does have a cap on the damage limit. And then this is something they mentioned for the soft caps and everything. There are, like, see, here's the thing with these. There are different things that have different soft caps and whatnot. Later on, it will be changed. Later on, it will indeed be changed. Now, we have generally a 350,000 soft cap for normal attacks, period. And then burst will start off with 1 million. I've said this earlier. Later on, it will be changed to where burst streak will have 7.5 million soft cap. That was mainly due to the fact that there were some whales that managed to pull off such insane numbers with their burst streak to where they did like 100 million to full burst. Apparently the devs didn't want you dealing that much damage, so they put the soft cap there. Now, later on, it will change to where there's different limits, and that will generally adjust it. But the concept still applies, which I've explained before. When you hit the soft cap, excess damage past that gets adjusted. So, generally, unless you have no other option to increase your damage output, that's where you would consider trying to push past those caps as much as possible. Now, later on, most players will generally be able to hit the burst soft caps. And when it comes to ability soft caps, they can always do that. You'll always be able to hit ability soft caps. The normal attack soft cap is always the hardest to hit. So keep that in mind. And then something else that's not really known too. This will apply to elemental attack. And these happen to be the attribute compatibility. Your elemental attack will be adjusted based on what you're going up against. So, that said, if you are, say, using a light team to face a darkness element enemy, then you will gain 48% more elemental attack. And in their case, they will lose 25%. If you're going up against, if you're like wind going up against fire, then it's 45% more elemental attack that they get, but you lose 25%. Generally speaking, when you have advantage, it is 45%. However, light and darkness gets an extra 3% because of the fact that they have some sort of weird systems in place that kind of like don't give them access to as much multiplier abuse as the other 4 elements, so they get a little bit of an edge right there. Especially considering the fact that if you use light or dark in order to attack the other elements, like say you use light to attack wind, you're getting a 3% elemental attack increase right there. But they instead deal 100% to you. So they get no change, but you get bonus damage. Now, when it comes to Phantom Element, which is a rare element in the game, honestly, I wouldn't even consider it an element. I just consider it a special circumstance. But in that case, they always deal and take weakness damage. Unless they're up against themselves. And the only case they'll be up against themselves is specific summons, or if you or if you put a phantom weapon on your soul, which you really shouldn't do. Now, in those cases, it's just a huge damage race, considering the fact that they deal more damage than normal, but you also take more, like they also take more damage than normal. So that's something to know. And again, this is applied to elemental attacks. So generally speaking, if you have 100% elemental attack and you have elemental advantage, we'll say hello to another 45%. So that's something to consider. But for the most part, damage, you're going to want to abuse multipliers and whatnot. And then this is something else to know too, is that again, the plus values. What I didn't break down is the fact that weapons can be used on other weapons and Kamihime. Addons can only be used on other Addons. Later on, we will get something where we can get an orb-based item that will give plus value to stuff as well. So something else to look forward to. The last thing I need to mention about damage output is the fact that every single character in the game has base combo values. And generally speaking, you start out the gate with a 8% chance to double attack and a 3% chance to triple attack. Excuse me. Now, if the character is awakened, they get the bonus 2% to both, which takes away from their single attack rate. So that will then become a 10% chance to double attack and a 5% chance to triple attack. Now, I don't know what the priority is, and it was generally considered that double attack priority would be double attack would have more priority than triple attack, but I don't necessarily know. That's something to keep in mind, but you do want triple attack more than double. Just do not go out your way for the weapons for that, because the weapons are not worth it. You don't need Rush and you don't need Barrage. Just simply ignore them. If you don't have anything better, oh well, then that's probably where you're going to have to use them. But do not go out of your way for those two types of weapons, Rush, Barrage, or the combined effect of Avalanche. Don't worry about them. Now, if it comes with something else, like say it comes with Assault, or if it comes with Defender, depends on what the other skills give, because then it might actually be helpful. Because I had the Phantom Glaive where it comes with Assault, so I might as well. But other than that, I wouldn't worry about it too much. Now, this thing about recovery items, something that a lot of people don't necessarily know. The single potion gives you half your HP back, half your max back, and the AoE potion is 35% back. And it is not affected by Ascension or any of those recovery boosts. However, Ascension is something a little bit different, and I've covered that in a weapon skill video. Healing also has caps, but they have hard caps. That means no matter how hard you try, you're not going past that cap. Hard caps are completely different than soft caps, in where they cannot be bypassed. The only thing you can do is increase it. So that's where Ascension would kick in. And also buffs that happen to give that too. Now, in those cases, you may or may not want essential weapons. It depends. It depends on how much survivability you really want, and then on top of that, if you even need it. But generally speaking, Ascension can help you out, especially in the case of souls, because they tend to do a lot of healing if you have the healing based souls. Like even Caspar heals for quite a lot too, and she can do it AoE when done right. But Ascension, it works the same way as Exceed, Elaborate, Technical, and all that. It gives a flat increase, and then it also gives a cap increase. The cap increase is much higher than the flat increase, because most healing skills in the game already go by a percentage multiplier. Like, believe it or not, some heals, like I think Soul's heal was 50% of your HP, but it caps off at 1800. So that's something to know. They have healing like that, basically. Like, there's like maybe a 2,000 healing cap, but if you don't even have 2,000 HP, you get half of it back when you're healed. So it's just weird how Essential works in that case. And then the heal increase is a flat percentage that's added to that total. So if it was 50%, it's now 55%. This is something to know because of the fact that there are some skills in the game that do not have a healing cap. So that will spike those a little bit more. You don't need it in the case of Tish's healing, but there's a few other characters that can sip and do it without it going 100% heal. So that's something to know. But you mainly get Ascension for the cap increase. And it's a generally big cap increase. You can go up to 200% on that one. So if you had 200%, then a heal that had a cap of 2,000 is now going to cap of 6,000. But anyways, this video has gone on long enough. I've covered all that stuff because these, believe it or not, are basics to this game. They are indeed basics, and I had to break down the basics of the damage formula, also give some side info about some stuff that will help out to break down the basics of the combat power, because honestly, the combat power doesn't mean too much of crap, if you want to be honest. It's an interesting little way to measure somebody, but it doesn't fully show the extent of their capabilities, because most of your output comes from your weapons and your Addons, and the Kamihime you use too. Which is why I said do not go after Lucent weapons unless you know you can use them very well with a very good team, with very good weapon skill effects and all that, because Lucent weapons play into the favorite weapon type thing, and it's something that's generally not looked at as good, especially considering the fact that right now, most characters in the game don't even like more than one weapon. That will change later on, but it's still not that great. So, Lucent weapons and a bonus from favorite weapons generally can be ignored. There's a few rare cases where it can actually work, but that's something you would have to look up. Especially considering the fact that later on they should put something in there that will literally tell you what that character likes for weapon types. So, there's that. But Souls is blatantly obvious because it's the only two weapons they can use. Now, the last thing I need to mention too is the fact that a lot of this info does seem a little bit harrowing, but it's something that should be considered if you're trying to take on some of the harder content in the game. Because it's a starting point on when people should be able to start soloing the ultimate raids. Because everybody should be able to solo those at some point or another. Same case with dealing with accessory quest rank 7. And then later on, we're going to get some very difficult content, and while it is indeed optional, it's still recommended you do that in order to know what the limits of your characters are. And what I'm mentioning is the Titan raids, which you probably still want to do for the Machine Beasts anyways, because the Machine Beasts are actually pretty good. They're not like must-have, but they are pretty good, and it's still permanent content. And then there's the heroic difficulty, which you get a I1 medal for doing that, which doesn't really do anything except for just for show-off purposes, but it's still a very challenging difficulty fight, and you will not have a chance if you do not know this stuff. You will not have a chance for the Titan raids if you do not know this stuff either. And then later on we'll get the Guardian Plus raids. Last I checked, all of the Elemental Guardians have a Plus version. Osh is the only one that doesn't. I don't consider her as an Elemental Guardian. I consider her as her own special little case. Especially considering what it takes to even get her to come out anyways. You have to kill an Elemental Guardian in order to get her to come out. And it's only guaranteed the first time, per day. But all of the Guardian raids, Haggith, or Ophiel, I was about to call her Orpheal, but Ophiel, I'm drawing a blank on quite a few of them, but you already know what they are. The Fire, Water, Thunder, Wind, Light, and Dark. They all have plus versions. And like the Ragnarok Catastrophes, they have helpers this time around. They have more HP. They deal more damage. Their entire AI is different. Those are very difficult content as well. And you have to have elemental advantage for those, or you're going to be at a very bad disadvantage. Especially considering the fact that it's not just the damage it'll deal to you that's going to be different. Because remember, you take less damage with advantage. You will also get hit with this side effect that we've had for 2 guild competitions now, where you won't be able to debuff them, and your total damage will get reduced by 90%. Because you did not face them with elemental advantage. So, again, this is a lot of stuff that will really help you out for that type of content, because generally you can play the game however you want, but some things in the game will not let you win easily if you do not pay attention to this stuff. So, that's something to really consider. Like, get the hang of all this, and it will make a lot of things much, much easier for you. Some things you might have thought wasn't possible might instantly change just by changing your stuff around. I've seen it happen so many times with newer players. They suddenly paid attention, and then all of a sudden they can clear Ragnarok in events. But anyways, that's all for this. This is going on for a long time, but like I said, this is a lot to go over, but this is very important. And this is just layers. Like, this is just a first layer of all the info in this game. So, again, it's a lot to take in, but it's something to know. Like, just as a sneak little peek of some of this stuff, like, I may or may not go over all of these, but look at the list of the buffs and debuffs. Look at all the lists of the buffs and debuffs. And then you have to break down that they go into different frames, too. But this is a long page, and I'm just scrolling down all the different buffs and debuffs, different values, what they do, who uses them, how to use them. It's a lot. It's a lot. So the stuff I covered in this video, that's the first step. That is easily the first step, because it helps you on how to build your teams. It helps you on what you may or may not want. But definitely get used to that damage formula, because it will help you out with different stuff. However, there are some things in the damage formula that some people may or may not be able to use. Sometimes you might be better off with Pride over Vigor. Sometimes you might want to get the Stinger. Who knows? It all depends on what you have access to, and how much you can abuse it. That is how the whales got 100 million full burst damage before. They abused the crap out of multipliers. But anyways, that's all for this. More of this will definitely come soon. And for those of you that are wondering what the when the next character discussion vid is going to pop up, it's going to be pretty soon, because I'm going to get started on that one within the next few days, and I'll have that up pretty soon. I'm just taking my time on it because there's so many characters, and trust me, it's a lot to go over on that one alone. But anyways, that's all for this. More of this will come soon, and take care.